The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone courtyard of Kensington Palace as Prince William adjusted his navy blue suit jacket one final time. Today was different from his usual royal engagements. There were no cameras waiting, no crowds gathered behind velvet ropes, and no official schedule to follow. Instead, he carried a simple envelope in his jacket pocket, its edges worn from his nervous handling over the past week. William had received the letter. Through unconventional channels, it wasn't delivered through the usual royal mail system or handed to him by his private secretary. Instead, a young volunteer at a children's hospital had pressed it into his hands during his last official visit, whispering urgently that it was really important before disappearing back into the crowd. Of medical staff and patients, the letter was written in shaky handwriting on plain notebook paper. It told the story of Emma, a 7-year-old girl who had been battling leukemia for 2 years. But what made this letter different from the thousands of others he received wasn't Emma's medical condition. It was what she had done with her time. In the hospital that had kept William awake for nights, reading and rereading her words, Emma had started a small garden on the hospital's rooftop. With permission from the staff and help from other young patients, she had transformed a forgotten corner into a blooming sanctuary. She grew flowers, herbs, and small vegetables, sharing the harvest with other children who were too sick to eat. The regular hospital food, but more than that. She had created a place where scared children could find peace, where families could sit together, away from the sterile. White walls and beeping machines, the letter explained that Emma's condition had worsened. The doctors had told her family that she might not see another spring. Her biggest worry wasn't about herself, though. She was afraid that when she was gone, no one would take care of her garden. The other children loved it, but they came and went as their treatments ended. She needed someone who would promise to keep it alive, to make sure future patients would have the same peaceful place she had created. William had visited many hospitals in his royal duties, had met countless brave children, and had been moved by their stories. But something about Emma's selfless concern for others, even as she faced her own mortality, had touched him in a way that surprised him. He found himself thinking about her garden during meetings, wondering about the small hands that had planted those seeds and the hope that had grown alongside them. After 3 sleepless nights, William had made a decision that went against all royal protocol. He would visit Emma privately, without fanfare or media attention. He would see this garden that meant so much to her, and he would make her a promise that would give her peace in her final days. His protection officers had initially resisted. The idea, unscheduled visits were a security nightmare, and private meetings without official oversight were highly irregular. But William had been firm in his resolve. Some things, he explained to his staff, were more important than protocol. Some promises needed to be made not as a prince, but as one human being to another. The drive to the hospital took 40 minutes through London's busy morning traffic. William sat in the back seat of the unmarked car, watching ordinary people go about their daily lives. They walked to work, bought coffee from street vendors, and hurried to catch buses, all blissfully unaware that their future king was struggling with emotions he rarely allowed himself to feel this deeply as they approached the hospital. William could see the building rising against the gray London sky. Somewhere in that maze of windows and corridors was a little girl who had spent her precious time creating beauty for others. Somewhere up there was a garden that had become a beacon of hope in one of the darkest places a child could find themselves. The car pulled into a discreet entrance at the back of the hospital. William's security detail had coordinated with the hospital administration to ensure maximum privacy. Only a handful of staff knew about his visit, and they had all signed confidentiality agreements. This wasn't about good publicity or royal duty. This was about a promise that needed to be made away from the public eye. William stepped out of the car and looked up at the towering building before him. In a few minutes, he would meet Emma face to face. He would see the garden she had created and hear her story in her own words. First, he needed to prepare himself for what he might find behind that hospital door, and for the promise he was about to make to a dying child. The hospital's head nurse, Mrs. Patricia Coleman, met William at the staff entrance. She was a woman in her 50s, with kind eyes and graying hair pulled back in a practical bun. She had worked at the Children's Hospital for over 20 years and had seen thousands of young patients come and go. But when she spoke about Emma, her voice carried a special warmth that told William this child was extraordinary. "Your Royal Highness," she said, with a slight curtsy, "Emma doesn't know you're coming. We thought it best to surprise her as you requested. She's been having a difficult week, but this morning she insisted on going up to her garden despite feeling weak. The doctors allowed it because—" Mrs. Coleman paused, her professional composure wavering slightly. "Because it makes her happy," William finished gently. Understanding the unspoken truth that Emma's remaining happy moments were precious and numbered. They walked through corridors that smelled of disinfectant and hope. William noticed the colorful murals painted on the walls, the playful ceiling decorations, and the small touches that tried to make this medical environment feel less frightening for young patients. Nurses moved quietly between rooms, their soft-soled shoes barely making a sound on the polished floors as they rode the elevator to the 7th floor. Mrs. Coleman told William more about Emma's garden project. She started it 8 months ago, right after her second round of chemotherapy. She was so sick, but she kept talking about wanting to grow something beautiful. The hospital initially said no, worried about infection risks and safety concerns. But Emma was persistent. She wrote letters to the administration, got other patients to sign petitions, and even had her parents research medical studies about therapeutic gardening. The elevator doors opened, and they stepped into a corridor. Lined with large windows, William could see glimpses of London's skyline beyond, but Mrs. Coleman led him toward a different view. She didn't just want a garden for herself, the nurse continued. Emma had noticed that many children felt trapped inside these walls. Some hadn't seen real sunlight or breathed fresh air in weeks. She wanted to create a place where they could remember what the outside world felt like. They approached a heavy door marked "Rooftop Access, Authorized Personnel Only." Mrs. Coleman pushed it open, and William was immediately struck by a gentle breeze carrying the scent of growing things. The rooftop had been transformed from a utilitarian space into something magical. The garden wasn't large, perhaps 30 feet by 20 feet, but every inch had been thoughtfully planned. Raised beds made from recycled wooden pallets held a variety of plants. There were sunflowers that stretched toward the sky, their faces following the sun's path. Herb gardens released fragrant clouds of basil, mint, and rosemary when the wind stirred their leaves. Tomato plants heavy with red fruit climbed wooden stakes, while colorful flowers created borders that seemed to smile in the morning light. But what took William's breath away wasn't just the garden itself, it was the sight of Emma sitting on a small wooden bench in the center of it all. She was tiny for 7 years old, made even smaller by her illness. A colorful knit cap covered her head where chemotherapy had taken her hair, and an IV pole stood beside her, connected to a port. In her thin arm, but her face, turned up toward the sun with her eyes closed, radiated pure contentment. She wasn't alone. 3 other children sat near her on cushions and small stools. One was a boy of about 10 who was reading aloud from a picture book. Another was a girl, perhaps Emma's age, who was carefully watering a patch of lettuce with a small watering can. The third child, a teenager with a leg cast, was sketching the garden in a notebook. Mrs. Coleman whispered to William, "She comes up here every day that she's strong enough." Other children started following her, and now it's become an unofficial therapy space. The doctors have noticed that patients who spend time in the garden need less pain medication and seem to heal faster. Emma created something that's helped dozens of children, but she's too modest to realize the impact she's had. William watched as Emma opened her eyes and turned to help the younger girl with her watering. Even in her weakened state, she was teaching and encouraging others. She showed the girl how to water the roots without splashing the leaves, explained which plants needed more water and which needed less, and praised the child's careful attention to the task. The hardest part, Mrs. Coleman continued, is that Emma knows her time is limited. But instead of being afraid or angry, she spends her energy worrying about what will happen to this place when she's gone. She's been asking all the adults if someone will promise to keep it growing. She's even written detailed instructions for caring for each type of plant, noting which children seem to enjoy which activities most. William felt a tightness in his chest as he realized the full scope of Emma's selflessness. Here was a child facing the ultimate fear, yet her primary concern was ensuring that future patients would have the same source of joy and peace that she had created for herself and others. Taking a deep breath, William stepped forward into the garden. It was time to meet the remarkable little girl who had brought him here, to learn firsthand about the legacy of hope she was so desperately trying to preserve. Emma looked up from the watering demonstration as William approached, and her eyes widened with surprise. For a moment she seemed to question whether she was seeing things clearly. The other children noticed her expression and turned to see what had captured her attention. "Hello, Emma," William said softly, crouching down to meet her at eye level. "I received your letter and I had to come see this beautiful garden you've created." Emma's small hand flew to her mouth and tears immediately began forming in her eyes. But these weren't tears of sadness. Her face lit up with a joy so pure and unexpected that it made William's heart skip a beat. The other children looked between Emma and William, beginning to understand that something very special was happening. You're Prince William?" Emma whispered, her voice barely audible. "You really came to see my garden?" "I really did," William replied, settling more comfortably on the ground beside her bench. "Your letter told me about this special place, but seeing it in person, it's even more amazing than I imagined. Would you tell me about how you started it?" Emma's initial shock began to fade, replaced by the enthusiasm of a child eager to share something she loved. She began explaining how the idea had come to her during a particularly difficult night. When she couldn't sleep because of her treatment, she had been looking out her hospital room window at the empty rooftop, imagining what it would look like if it were covered with flowers instead of just concrete and medical equipment. "I kept thinking about my grandmother's garden back home," Emma said, her voice growing stronger as she spoke. "Before I got sick, I used to help her plant vegetables every spring. She taught me that gardens need love and patience, and that even the smallest seed can grow into something beautiful if you take care of it properly." William listened intently as Emma walked him through the garden, pointing out different sections and explaining the thought process behind each choice. She showed him the sunflowers, which she had planted because they always look happy and they follow the sun, just like we should follow good things. The herbs were chosen because they smelled wonderful and could be used to make tea for children who had trouble eating. The vegetables were selected for their bright colors and because fresh food tasted so much better than hospital meals. But what moved William most was hearing about the other children who had become part of the garden community. Emma introduced him to each of the young gardeners present. There was Marcus, age 10, who had been in the hospital for months with a rare bone disease. He had become the garden's unofficial storyteller, reading to the plants because Emma had told him that plants grew better when people talked to them. Sarah, the 6-year-old who had been helping with watering, had been born with heart defects and had undergone multiple surgeries. She had initially been afraid to touch the plants, worrying she might hurt them. But Emma had patiently taught her that gentle care was more important than strength. And now, Sarah was responsible for the most delicate seedlings. The teenager with the leg cast was named David. He was 15 and had been in a car accident that required several operations to save his leg. He had been angry and depressed when he first arrived at the hospital, refusing to participate in any activities. But something about Emma's quiet determination and the peaceful atmosphere of the garden had drawn him in. He'd started sketching the plants as a way to pass time, but had discovered a talent and passion for art that he never knew he possessed. "Emma doesn't just grow plants," David told William with obvious admiration. "She grows hope. When new kids come to the hospital and they're scared or sad, she brings them up here. She shows them that even in a place like this, beautiful things can happen. She's taught all of us that we can create something good, even when everything else feels broken." Emma blushed at David's words, but William could see the truth in them. This small girl had created more than a garden. She had built a community, a support system, and a legacy of healing that extended far beyond the plants themselves. As they continued walking through the space, Emma showed William a small notebook where she had been recording everything about the garden. It contained detailed planting schedules, notes about which vegetables different children preferred, instructions for seasonal care, and even hand-drawn maps showing where each type of plant was located. "I've been writing everything down," Emma explained, "because I want to make sure that She paused, choosing her words carefully. "When I can't take care of it anymore, someone else will know how to keep it growing. Yeah, the other kids love it so much, and new patients need to have. This place, too." William felt his throat tighten as he realized the full weight of responsibility that this 7-year-old had placed on her small shoulders. She wasn't just worried about her own mortality. She was trying to ensure that her legacy of kindness would continue long after she was gone. Looking at Emma's hopeful face, surrounded by the beauty she had created and the community she had built, William knew that he was about to make one of the most important promises of his life. This wasn't about royal duty or public service. This was about honoring the extraordinary spirit of a child who had chosen to spend her final months creating joy for others. William sat down on the small bench beside Emma, the weight of the moment settling around them like the gentle afternoon breeze that stirred the garden's leaves. The other children had given them space, sensing that something important was about to happen, but they remained close enough to feel included in this special moment. "Emma," William began, his voice carrying the sincerity that made him beloved by the British people, "I want to tell you something, and I want you to listen very carefully." Emma turned her full attention to him, her large eyes reflecting both hope and the wisdom that illness had forced upon her young soul. She clutched her gardening notebook against her chest, as if it contained all her dreams and fears. "What you've created here isn't just a garden," William continued, gesturing to the thriving plants around them. "You've built something that will last forever, not because of the plants themselves, but because of the love and hope you've planted in every person who has spent time here." Emma nodded slowly, understanding that he was leading up to something important. "I want to make you a promise," William said, reaching into his jacket pocket and pulling out an official-looking document that he had prepared before coming. "Not as a prince, but as someone who has been deeply moved by your kindness and generosity." He unfolded the paper, which bore the royal seal at the top. Emma's eyes widened as she recognized the significance of what she was seeing. "This is a royal charter," William explained, "which means it's an official promise from the royal family that will last forever. I'm creating the Emma Henderson Memorial Garden Foundation. This document guarantees that your garden will be maintained and expanded, that new children's hospitals across the country will have gardens like this one, and that your story will be shared to inspire other young people to create beauty in the world." Emma's hands trembled as she processed what he was telling her. Tears began flowing freely down her cheeks, but her smile was radiant. "But that's not all," William continued, his own voice becoming thick with emotion. "I'm also promising that I personally will visit this garden at least once every year. I'll help tend the plants, I'll meet the new children who come here, and I'll make sure they all know about the remarkable girl who started it all." The other children had moved closer during this conversation, and now they too were crying. The young storyteller was the first to understand the full magnitude of what was happening. "Emma," he said, his voice filled with awe, "you're going to be remembered forever. Kids who aren't even born yet will know your name and play in gardens that exist because of you." Emma looked around at her friends, then back at William, and finally at the thriving garden that surrounded them. For a moment she seemed overwhelmed by the enormity of what he had just promised her. "Will they really know about me?" she asked quietly. "Will they know that I was just a regular kid who wanted to help other kids feel better?" "They'll know." William assured her that you were an extraordinary kid who chose to use her time to create something beautiful for others. "They'll know that even when you were scared and sick, you thought about making life better for children you had never met. They'll know that you understood something that many adults never learn, that the most important thing we can do in life is to leave the world a little better than we found it." Emma was quiet for a long moment, absorbing the weight of William's words and the promise he had made. Then, with the practical wisdom that had characterized her throughout her illness, she opened her notebook. "I need to show you my planting schedule for next season," she said, her voice becoming stronger and more purposeful. Spring will be here in a few months, and there are specific things that need to be planted at specific times. Also, I've been thinking about adding a section for vegetables that children with different dietary restrictions can eat safely. William smiled, recognizing that Emma was doing what she had done throughout her illness, channeling her energy into caring for others rather than dwelling on her own situation. They spent the next hour going through Emma's detailed notes together. She showed him her plans for expanding the herbs section, her ideas for creating shadier areas where children receiving certain treatments could sit comfortably, her dream of adding a small greenhouse that could provide fresh flowers year-round. As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows across the rooftop, Emma looked up from her notebook with an expression of peace that William would remember for the rest of his life. "Thank you," she said simply. "I'm not scared anymore about what will happen to my garden. I know it will keep growing and helping kids feel better, even after." She paused, then continued with remarkable composure, "Even after I go to be with my grandmother again." William felt tears welling up in his own eyes as he realized that he had just witnessed something profound. This brave little girl had found peace, not because her own fears had been eased, but because she knew her legacy of kindness would continue. In making this promise to Emma, William understood that she had given him something just as valuable, a reminder of what truly mattered in life, and an inspiration that would guide his own service to others for years to come. 3 weeks after William's visit to the hospital, he received a phone call that he had been dreading but expecting. Mrs. Coleman's gentle voice on the other end of the line told him that Emma had passed away peacefully in her sleep, surrounded by her family and holding the pressed flowers she had picked from her garden during their last day together. She was talking about the garden until the very end, Mrs. Coleman said through her tears. Yesterday morning, she insisted on going up to see the plants one more time. She picked a bouquet for her mother and another one for her father. And she asked us to make sure the other children knew they should keep watering everything while she was resting. William felt a profound sadness wash over him, but mixed with, it was something unexpected, a sense of privilege that he had been able to know Emma, even briefly, and witness her extraordinary spirit. He immediately made arrangements to attend her funeral, despite the security complications and media attention it would inevitably bring. The funeral was held at a small church in Emma's hometown, about an hour outside London. William arrived quietly, hoping to pay his respects without disrupting the family's private grief. But as he approached the church, he was amazed to see hundreds of people gathered outside. There were children from the hospital, some still connected to 4 poles, or using wheelchairs. There were doctors and nurses who had cared for Emma. There were neighbors from her community who had been touched by her story. But what moved William most were the delegations from other children's hospitals across the country. Word of Emma's garden and William's promise had spread throughout the medical community, and young patients from facilities hundreds of miles away had traveled with their families to honor the little girl who had inspired them to start their own therapeutic gardens inside the church. Emma's small white casket was surrounded by more flowers than William had ever seen at a funeral. But these weren't formal arrangements from florists. They were sunflowers, herbs, tomatoes, wildflowers, all grown by children in hospitals, schools, and home gardens who had heard about Emma's legacy and wanted to contribute something they had grown themselves. Emma's father, quiet man, who worked as a mechanic, stood at the podium to deliver the eulogy. His hands shook as he unfolded a piece of paper, but his voice was strong when he began to speak. "My daughter Emma was 7 years old," he said, "but she understood something that took me 40 years to learn. She knew that the purpose of life isn't to live as long as possible, but to live in a way that makes life better for others." He went on to tell stories about Emma's kindness that extended far beyond her garden, how she had saved her allowance to buy small gifts for other children in the hospital, how she had learned to braid hair so she could help other young patients who had lost their hair feel beautiful, how she had written letters to her classmates back home, not talking about her illness, but asking about their problems and offering encouragement. "The doctors told us that Emma's cancer was aggressive, and there wasn't much they could do," her father continued. "But they were wrong about one thing. Emma's cancer couldn't touch the most important part of her, her heart and her spirit. Those parts of her will live forever in every child who finds peace in a garden, in every person who chooses kindness over fear, and in every act of love that grows from the seeds she planted. After the service, William approached Emma's parents. Privately, he had brought with him the original royal charter he had shown Emma, now framed and ready to be presented to her family. "I want you to have this," he told them. "But more than that, I want you to know that the promise I made to Emma will be kept. The foundation is already being established, and we've received commitments from hospitals across the United Kingdom to create therapeutic gardens. Emma's story is going to help thousands of children for generations to come." Emma's mother, who had been composed throughout the service, finally broke down when she saw the charter. She was so excited when she came home that day. She said through her tears. She couldn't stop talking about how the prince had visited her garden and made her a promise. She said it was the best day of her whole life, was one of the best. "Days of mine too," William replied, and he meant it completely. As the weeks passed, William found himself thinking about Emma constantly. Her courage and selflessness had changed something fundamental in how he approached his royal duties. He began seeking out opportunities to meet children who were facing difficult circumstances, not for photo opportunities or official engagements, but for genuine connections that might make a difference in their lives. The Emma Henderson Memorial Garden Foundation grew quickly, attracting donations and volunteers from around the world. The original garden at the Children's Hospital became a pilgrimage site of sorts. Visited by families dealing with childhood illness who found hope and inspiration in Emma's story, William kept his promise to visit annually, but found himself returning much more frequently. Each time he walked among the plants that Emma had first planted with her small hands, he felt her presence and remembered her lesson about the importance of planting seeds of kindness that would grow long after. The gardener was gone. 1 year after Emma's passing, William stood once again on the rooftop of the Children's Hospital, but the scene before him was transformed beyond recognition. What had begun as Emma's small garden had expanded to cover the entire rooftop. Professional landscapers, working with child psychologists and horticultural therapists, had created different themed areas while maintaining the spirit of Emma's original vision. There was now a sensory garden filled with plants, chosen for their textures, sounds, and fragrances designed specifically for children with visual impairments or developmental disabilities. A meditation area with comfortable seating allowed families to find quiet moments together, away from the intensity of medical treatments. The original vegetable section had been expanded into a full therapeutic farming area, where children could grow food that would actually be served in the hospital cafeteria, giving them a sense of contribution and purpose. But the most remarkable addition was the Emma Henderson Memorial Greenhouse, a beautiful glass structure that had been funded entirely by donations from families whose children had been helped by therapeutic gardens around the world. Inside, children could garden year-round, regardless of London's weather, and the space doubled as a classroom where young patients could continue their education in a peaceful, natural environment. William was not alone on this anniversary visit. Beside him stood Emma's parents, who had become passionate advocates for pediatric therapeutic gardening. They had established a scholarship program that trained hospital staff in horticultural therapy techniques, and they traveled frequently to help other hospitals establish their own gardens. "She would have been 8 today," Emma's mother said softly, touching the plaque that had been installed near the original planting area. The bronze marker bore Emma's photo and a simple inscription. She planted seeds of hope that bloom forever. Around them, the garden was alive with activity. Children of various ages worked alongside their families, volunteers, and hospital staff. Some were well enough to kneel in the dirt and plant seeds with their own hands. Others, too weak for physical activity, directed family members in caring for their plants from wheelchairs or hospital beds that had been brought outside. William watched a particularly touching scene unfold near the herb garden. A boy of about 10, bald from chemotherapy and wearing a hospital gown, was carefully explaining to a younger girl how to harvest basil without damaging the plant. His technique was perfect, and William realized that this knowledge had been passed down from Emma through the generations of young gardeners who had followed her. "The amazing thing," said Dr. Jennifer Walsh, the hospital's new director of therapeutic programs, is that we're seeing measurable improvements in patient outcomes. Children who participate in garden activities require less pain medication, have better appetites, sleep more peacefully, and show improved emotional resilience. Emma's instinct about the healing power of growing things has been proven scientifically. Dr. Walsh had been hired specifically to oversee the expansion of the garden program and to conduct research on its effectiveness.
Ow!
Her preliminary findings had been so promising that medical journals were requesting articles, and hospitals from dozens of countries had sent representatives to study the program. But perhaps the most moving aspect of the garden's evolution was the way Emma's story continued. To inspire new acts of kindness, a wall inside the greenhouse displayed letters from children around the world who had started their own garden projects after hearing about Emma. There were photos of school gardens in rural communities, rooftop gardens at pediatric clinics in developing countries, and even small herb gardens grown in apartment windows by children who wanted to contribute to their local food banks. As William read through some of these letters, he was struck by how Emma's simple act of creating beauty in a difficult place had rippled outward to touch lives she never could have imagined. A 10-year-old girl in Australia had convinced her school to donate vegetables from their garden to a nearby homeless shelter. A group of teenagers in Canada had transformed an abandoned lot into a community garden that brought together families from different cultural backgrounds. A young boy in South Africa had started growing herbs to help his grandmother, who suffered from chronic pain but couldn't afford expensive medications. "Your Royal Highness," came a small voice from behind him. William turned to see a girl of about Emma's age, wearing a colorful headscarf that couldn't quite hide the fact that she was undergoing cancer treatment. "Are you the prince who was Emma's friend?" "I am," William replied, kneeling down to meet her at eye level, just as he had done with Emma a year earlier. "My name is Sophie," the girl said. "I'm new here, and the other kids told me about Emma and how she started all this." She gestured around at the thriving garden. "They said you made her a promise, and that's why we get to have this beautiful place." William nodded, feeling the familiar tightness in his throat that came whenever he spoke about Emma. "I wanted to tell you something," Sophie continued, her voice becoming more serious. "I was really scared when I first came to the hospital. I didn't want to be around other kids because I was embarrassed about being sick. But when I came up here and saw all this and heard about how Emma made it for kids like us, I wasn't scared anymore." She paused, then added with the wisdom that seemed to come naturally to children facing serious illness. "I think Emma is still here, you know? Not like a ghost or anything scary, but in all the good things that keep happening because of what?" she started. William felt tears welling up in his eyes as he realized that Sophie was absolutely right. Emma's physical presence was gone, but her spirit lived on in every child who found peace in the garden, every family who found hope in the midst of their medical crisis, and in every act of kindness that grew from the example she had set. As the afternoon sun began to set over London, casting a golden light across the memorial garden, William made a silent promise to Emma's memory. He would continue to honor her legacy not just through the foundation that bore her name, but through his own commitment to seek out and support the kind of quiet heroism that she had embodied. In a world that often celebrated fame and power, Emma had shown him that the most profound impact came from simple acts of love, performed without expectation of recognition or reward. The garden would continue to grow and flourish, season after season, year after year. And with each new flower that bloomed and each new child who found comfort in its peaceful spaces, Emma's legacy of hope would live on, proof that even the smallest person can plant seeds that will bloom for generations.